Did you know that the United Kingdom once tried to introduce a law that would have banned access to online porn unless people proved their age with official documents? It sounds like something from a science fiction story, but this was a very real government plan. For years, politicians, parents, and campaigners worried about children finding adult websites with just a few clicks. To them, the internet seemed like a dangerous place where young people could stumble onto explicit material without any barriers. Out of this fear came one of the most controversial and confusing laws ever debated in Britain, the so-called porn ban. The idea behind it was simple on the surface: keep children safe. But the way it was designed made it one of the most ambitious and heavily criticised online restrictions ever proposed in a democratic country. Instead of blocking harmful websites outright, the UK government wanted to force porn sites to set up strict age verification systems. That meant, if you were over 18 and wanted to visit, you would have to prove your age first, by providing a credit card, an ID, or using a third-party age verification provider approved by regulators. In other words, watching adult content in the UK would no longer be anonymous. This sparked huge questions. Could the government really control the entire internet in this way? What would happen to people's privacy if their identities and viewing habits were logged in some database? And most importantly, would this law even work in practice? These were not just technical questions, but cultural ones too. The porn ban touched on issues of freedom, safety, morality, and technology all at once. At the time, newspapers around the world ran stories mocking the idea. Internet users created memes saying the UK wanted to ban porn. In reality, the government wasn't trying to ban it completely, but the effect of the law could have made access so difficult and risky that many people felt it was basically the same thing. From the very beginning, it was clear this policy would not go smoothly. Yet, it's important to remember why the government even considered such a move. Parents were genuinely concerned about children seeing explicit videos at younger and younger ages. Campaigners argued that unrestricted porn could affect mental health, shape dangerous ideas about sex, and increase exploitation. The politicians who pushed for the law presented it as a solution to a growing digital crisis. For them, this was not about restricting freedom, it was about protecting the next generation. But while the motives may have seemed noble, the methods raised alarms. Could a law like this really work in the age of VPNs, private browsing, and global websites? Wouldn't people just find ways around it? And if so, what would be the point of risking millions of people's personal information for a system that might fail from day one? The UK's porn ban became a rare case where nearly everyone had something to say. Parents, teenagers, tech experts, activists, even comedians. Some saw it as necessary, others saw it as laughable, and many saw it as dangerous. To understand how such an unusual law even came into existence, we need to go back to its origins and see what led the government to think it was possible in the first place. The story of the UK's porn ban begins long before the law was drafted. In the early 2010s, debates about internet safety were heating up. Smartphones were becoming common, Wi-Fi was everywhere, and parents started to notice that their children could access almost anything online without restriction. For older generations, the internet seemed like a wild and dangerous frontier. Unlike television or movies, which had ratings and censorship boards, the online world felt uncontrolled. Politicians knew this anxiety was growing, and they wanted to act. One of the biggest figures behind the early push for restrictions was David Cameron, the Conservative Prime Minister at the time. He spoke openly about the dangers of children being exposed to online pornography. In several speeches, Cameron argued that the internet should not be a place where kids could stumble onto explicit material by accident. His government started looking for solutions, and by the middle of the decade, they were seriously discussing laws to bring the online world under tighter control. The first steps were voluntary. Internet service providers in the UK were asked to introduce filters so that households could block adult content at the network level. This meant parents could activate a setting that filtered websites, just like parental controls on a computer. But critics quickly pointed out that these filters were inconsistent and often blocked completely harmless sites. They also did little to solve the main concern. Children who deliberately looked for adult content could still find it. By 2015 and 2016, the conversation shifted towards stronger action. Campaign groups like the NSPCC, National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, pushed the idea that porn was rewiring children's brains, changing their understanding of relationships, and exposing them to unrealistic expectations. Newspapers ran headlines about how easy it was for young kids to access adult material. Politicians from different parties saw an opportunity to show they were protecting family values. This pressure built into the Digital Economy Act of 2017, a wide-ranging law that covered many aspects of online life. Buried within it was the most ambitious idea: mandatory age verification for porn websites. The plan was to force every site that showed adult material to check users' ages before letting them in. The government pitched this as a modern, digital version of asking for ID at a shop. Just like you couldn't buy alcohol or cigarettes without proving your age, you wouldn't be able to watch porn without it either. At first, many people thought the idea sounded logical. After all, if age checks worked for movies and alcohol, why not online content? But what the government underestimated was the scale of the internet. Unlike a corner shop, websites weren't limited to the UK. They were global, run by companies based in the US, Europe, or even further away. Could the UK really force the entire internet to obey its rules? This question was at the heart of the controversy. The origins of the porn ban also show how much politics can shape technology. The plan didn't come from engineers or experts. It came from lawmakers responding to cultural fears. It was less about what was technically possible and more about showing action against what was seen as a social problem. This mismatch between political promises and technological reality would later become one of the reasons the law collapsed. But at this point in the story, optimism was still high. The government believed it could make the internet safer for children with one sweeping law. Campaigners believed they were finally addressing the risks of unrestricted online access. And the public? They were only just beginning to realise how complicated and how personal this law would turn out to be. The UK government's vision for the porn ban was not simply a vague promise of protection. It was a structured plan laid out in the Digital Economy Act, complete with systems, penalties and regulators ready to enforce it. On paper, the system looked strict and ambitious. The main idea was that porn websites would be required to block access to anyone who could not prove they were 18 or older. This meant that every adult user, regardless of their background, would have to go through an age verification process before watching explicit material. The age verification process had several proposed methods. One of the simplest was using a credit card. Since credit cards in the UK are generally issued only to adults, the government thought this would be an easy way to prove age. Another method was uploading official identification, such as a passport or driving licence, into an online system. There were also plans for third-party providers to create special porn passes, which could be purchased at shops or set up online. These passes would then act as digital keys, confirming that the user was over 18 without directly showing their identity to the website. Enforcement was also taken seriously. The regulator assigned to oversee this project was the British Board of Film Classification, or BBFC. Traditionally, the BBFC dealt with movies, assigning age ratings to cinema releases and DVDs. But under this law, their role would expand into the digital world. They would check whether websites were obeying the rules, and if not, they could order UK internet providers to block them. In theory, a website that refused to set up age checks would become inaccessible to everyone in the country. To supporters, this looked like a straightforward system. It seemed to mirror how society already handled age-sensitive content. Just as a shopkeeper checks ID before selling alcohol, a website would check ID before showing adult videos. But the internet is not a shop, and the flaws in this plan quickly became obvious. The first problem was scale. Unlike local shops, websites serve millions of people across different countries. Many of the biggest porn platforms are based outside the UK. Forcing them to build custom systems just for British users sounded unrealistic. Another problem was security. By requiring people to hand over sensitive personal information, the government was creating a huge risk. What if the databases storing passports, driving licenses, or credit card numbers were hacked? What if those records could be linked to what specific videos someone watched? The very idea made privacy experts nervous. They warned that a single leak could expose millions of people's intimate habits to the world. There were also cultural concerns. Many people did not want to be treated as potential lawbreakers simply for watching adult content. The ban blurred the line between protecting children and policing adults. Critics argued that while the law was supposed to protect the young, it forced everyone, including responsible adults, to jump through intrusive hoops. It created a sense of being monitored, of personal freedoms being restricted in the name of safety. Still, at this stage, the government spoke with confidence. They presented the porn ban as modern, necessary, and inevitable. They believed the BBFC could manage enforcement. They believed websites would comply because the UK represented a large audience. They believed people would accept some inconvenience in exchange for protecting children. On paper, it all looked simple enough. But in reality, the flaws were waiting to surface. Privacy groups were already sounding alarms. Technical experts warned the plan would be easy to bypass with VPNs, which allowed users to disguise their location and access foreign sites without restriction. Campaigners questioned why the government was focusing so heavily on porn websites, when platforms like Twitter or Tumblr also hosted explicit material. The closer the country moved to launch, the clearer it became that this law was far from straightforward. The plan for how the ban would work revealed a bigger truth about technology and politics. Rules that make sense in theory can collapse when applied to the messy, global, and fast-moving world of the internet. The UK thought it could regulate porn websites as if they were corner shops, but the internet was far larger, far faster, and far harder to control than any single government imagined. When the details of the UK's porn ban became public, the reaction was immediate and intense. Supporters praised the government for taking action, but critics quickly raised concerns that reached far beyond simple inconvenience. For many, the idea of handing over private documents or linking a credit card to adult website access sounded like a recipe for disaster. Privacy became the number one issue. Experts warned that forcing millions of people to prove their age through sensitive data could create one of the most dangerous databases in the country. If hackers ever broke into it, the fallout would be catastrophic. Not just stolen identities, but the exposure of deeply personal viewing habits. The risk was not theoretical. In the past, several major adult websites had already suffered data breaches. The thought of this happening again, but with official passports and driving licenses attached, sent chills through the public. Civil liberties groups also stepped into the debate. Organisations like the Open Rights Group argued that the porn ban was not just about safety, but about government overreach. They said the law created a new form of surveillance, where ordinary adults could be tracked for their private choices. The fear was that age verification would not remain limited to porn websites. Once introduced, such systems could spread into other areas, normalising a culture where every online action required identification. For a country that prided itself on personal freedoms, this was a frightening prospect. At the same time, everyday internet users mocked the plan for being unrealistic. Social media filled with jokes, memes, and sarcastic comments. People pointed out that anyone determined to avoid the rules could simply use a VPN, making the entire system meaningless. Others joked about the awkwardness of buying a so-called porn pass in a local shop. The law became a source of embarrassment, both for the government and for the country, as international media picked up the story and portrayed Britain as trying to control something uncontrollable. But the backlash was not only about privacy and feasibility. Some critics worried about unintended consequences for vulnerable people. For example, survivors of domestic abuse or members of the LGBTQ+ community who lived in unsafe households might be put at risk if their viewing history or identity checks were exposed. For them, adult websites were sometimes a space for exploring identity in private, and the ban threatened to strip that away. Instead of protecting people, it could actually harm those who most needed privacy. Even industry voices added to the opposition. Porn platforms and website operators questioned why they should invest in costly verification systems when the technology was untested and unpopular. Some smaller websites said they would rather block UK visitors entirely than comply with the new rules. Others warned that forcing users to hand over personal data to third parties would reduce traffic, drive people toward unregulated sites, and possibly increase exposure to unsafe or illegal content. Ironically, the law meant to protect could end up pushing people toward more dangerous corners of the internet. Meanwhile, the public's trust in the government's ability to handle such a sensitive project was already low. Britain had seen numerous IT projects fail in the past, often costing taxpayers millions without delivering results. Many assumed the porn ban would follow the same path: delays, technical problems, and eventual collapse. The skepticism was not unfounded, as deadlines were repeatedly missed even before the system officially launched. The government tried to reassure the public, insisting that privacy would be protected and that third-party age verification providers would store data safely. They emphasised that the BBFC, a respected regulator, was in charge, but reassurance was not enough to calm fears. The idea of being asked to hand over proof of identity before visiting a website felt intrusive in a way that no amount of technical explanation could soften. By the time the law was close to implementation, the backlash had become so strong that it overshadowed the original goal of protecting children. Instead of being seen as a safeguard, the porn ban was viewed by many as clumsy, invasive, and doomed. Politicians underestimated how personal this issue would feel to millions of ordinary adults, and how fiercely they would resist the thought of being monitored in their private choices. The debate became less about child safety and more about whether the government had the right, or the ability, to control the internet at all.